with this demo, I'm going to be using a walk cycle I did for the Zelda rig. But before we jump into that, I do want to show what a motion path is in Maya. So in Maya, we have a lot of different ways we can control objects. We can have constraints, we can have keys, we can bake things out. There's all sorts of different things. But on top of that, there is an option called motion paths. This is different than motion trails. So motion trails in Maya, if I take this object here, for instance, we get this animation. A motion trail is a way of tracking your motion. So you go to visualize, create editable motion trail. And you can see there's the path of action that the object took. Yay. A motion path is a way for us to have an object follow a specific path. Now, the way you can do this is the first thing you need to do is create a path. To do this, go to Create, Curves, and you can choose between any of these curve tools. My personal preferences are either the CV curve tool or the EP curve tool. Now, if you're totally new to those, what's the difference? CV, EP, letters. CV curve tool is Control Vertex Curve tool. So you create control vertices to create the curve. An EP curve tool is an editable point curve tool. So you create points that contain CVs. It's kind of like creating individual vertices versus creating a face if you've done modeling. That's one way of thinking about it. So for example, let's use a CV curve tool. So a control vertex is basically a way you can use to control a curve. It is points that affect the shape of a curve. So once I create this, let's actually go to the tool settings, and you'll see there's a few different options. By default, you'll have 3 cubic selected. What this means is that a curve needs to have 3 control vertices in order to actually be created. So to give an example, I click once, there's our first CV, click twice, second CV. Now this is not a curve here, this is just a line. Third, okay, and now the fourth. Now the reason we have to do 4 is the first one doesn't count. The first is the starting point. There we go. So now we have the starting point, 1, 2, 3. And from there, we can start creating curves. So there we go. Now, once we've created our curve, I can always right click on the curve and go to control vertices, and you can see these are all the ones we created, and I can now start shaping the curve, doing all sorts of things. Great. So this is our motion path. Any curve can be a motion path. Once I have that in place, I just need to select the object I want to place on the path, in this case the cube. Select my path. Now keep in mind that we have to create the curve in a very specific direction, because the starting point is going to be the starting point of our animation. The end point over here is going to be the end. So if I wanted this curve or this cube to start over here, I would have had to create my curve the other way, or I would have to rebuild this curve. That's something for later on, just something to keep in mind when you first create it. So select the cube, select the curve, and I'm going to go to constraint. So a motion path right here is a type of constraint. So if I go to constrain motion path, and I'm going to select attach to motion path. What this does, and looks like I need to make sure I delete my keys here. You do need to have no keys on your object in order for it to work, because you're in a sense constraining it. It doesn't work with something that's already keyed. So once I do that, cube, curve, constrain, motion path, attach to motion path, boop, there we go. And now if I scroll through, whee, we've got a little curve and a little roller coaster that we've done. So we've got that. At this point, it just follows along. Now, the way it created this was it took the timeline that I have. So I have from frame 1 to frame 120 in my timeline. It just took that and set that as the start and end of the curve. Now there is no typical animation curve that we would normally see in the graph editor for this. Instead, what we have, if I open up the graph editor, is a start and end. So you'll notice that the value of this curve, so this is the motion along the path, goes from 0 to 1, basically from start to finish. And if I adjust this, I can basically pick how far along the curve I want to go. So for example, let's insert a key here, and maybe by frame 50 we want it to be all the way at the end of the curve. We'll just set this to a value of 1. Oop, there you go, it's at the end. Now it goes through a little faster. And we can start adjusting things in this way. So maybe I want it to actually go forward along the curve, and then whoop, reverse, whoop, and then back again. You have full control, but it goes from 0 to 1, start to finish. So that's pretty much a motion curve. You take an object, attach it to the curve, and then you can adjust how far along the curve it goes, how much time it takes. So I saw a question here, how do you adjust the time of the curve? Start slow, fast in the middle, but end slow again. So if you're talking about, in this case, you would use this curve right here. So you just select your object. There's its path along the curve. So I want to start slow. Let's insert a key, have that stay a little flatter at the beginning, right there. Fast in the middle. Let's add a curve here. Make sure that curve speeds up, goes steeper in the middle. So for anyone who's new to the graph editor, flat curves are slow, steep curves are fast. So just looking at this, I can see that I'm going fast, or sorry, I'm going slow, then fast, and then slowing down here. So let's get really slow right there. So with that, we now have this object that barely starts, gets going, zips around, and then whoop, slows down to the end. So there you go. And Milia, thank you so much for the follow. I don't know if the notifications were on, but thank you. So that's pretty much a motion trail, or sorry, motion path. Very big distinction between the two. And these are very great for creating all sorts of interesting things. So for example, we can have a cube or a roller coaster. So let's say I want to animate a character going on a roller coaster. I can just take a bunch of objects, different cars, put them on a motion path, and then just create my roller coaster path here. And well, start going up, 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 and then whee! There you go. It's really just that. You could have fish swimming in the ocean. Just make a path and have like fish geometry just kind of wiggling along with it. It's really, really good. Now, with all of that, great. We know how to attach an object to a path. Yay! How can we use that with our animation? This is where things get a little bit more complicated. It seems easy at first, like, oh, I would just take my character, attach it to the path, and it's done. Yay! And for the most part, that's true. There's not too much to it, but there are distinct things that we have to watch out for that can basically make it useless if we're not careful. And Miliab, hey! That's awesome. Thanks so much for joining in. And yes, Sin is great at recruiting people. She is awesome. Sin is fantastic. So let's see. You could animate stars going around your head if your character gets smacked with a frying pan. Exactly. You could just create a loop around your character's head and just have the stars follow that. You could have like little birds kind of going around in like a little arc around the head. You could do all sorts of things. When you kind of start letting your imagination go with it, there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do. You could have cars driving down the streets in like slight curves, all sorts of little things. He just goes around telling us to join the dark side. The dark side has cookies. I always go with that, and I used to be a baker, so If you need cookies, just let me know. I've got all the recipes. Hey, Argonaut, hello! So, let's... waiting for the baking stream. I just need to get the setup working. My kitchen is not really made for streaming in, unfortunately. I'd have to move all of my equipment there and basically try not to step on wires. So, can you have a path in a path? In other words, can the bird circle around the head while the character is walking dazed? Yes. So, for example, what you would do is, let's see if this will work. So instead of using a curve tool, I'm going to create a NURBS circle, which is technically a curve. I haven't tried this before. I usually use paths, but hey, let's give it a try. So let's take the cube and try to attach it to the curve here. So I'm going to go to constrain, motion path, attach to motion path. There we go. So now that cube is going around in the circle. And all I would need to do is repeat the animation. So go into the graph editor, take this. Let's go into a linear mode so it doesn't ease in, ease out. And I'm just going to go to curves, post infinity. So after the curve, cycle. So after the curve, it's just going to repeat itself over and over and over. Let's also make sure I can see infinity. There we go. So now we've got this curve just going round and round and round and round and round forever. You could, like we were talking about before, maybe add a little variation to the curve where we take the controlled vertices. Let's just take every other one like that, move them down like so, and now we get wee. There we go. Now I'll take my curve, let's move it up. This is going to be a very big bird, and I'm just going to constrain the curve to the head control of my character. So constrain parent, and let's make sure maintain offset is turned on. So now, as the character moves their head, that follows along, and it still goes around. Done. Now, maybe you don't want it to rotate around and all that. You just want it to follow the head. Well, we don't use a parent constraint. Instead, we use maybe a point constraint. So now, let's go to constrain point. Make sure maintain offset is turned on. So now, if I rotate the head, and did I... Okay, I had the wrong control. There we go. So if I rotate the head, nothing happens. But if I move my character around, it follows along. So now I can have the character holding their head. Oh God, what's happening? And the birds are buzzing around or like going around the head. You can have multiple curves with different birds so that they're not exactly the same, and you're done. Or you could have stars and shapes and whatever. If you do a sphere, you can make it look like a rolling Goron. Exactly. You could do all sorts of things. It is amazing. Let's see. Catching up with the chat here. Going Cameron baking, and then they help each other. There's no real bake off. No, there isn't. We bake together. I don't think we've ever baked anything like he bakes one thing, I bake another, and then we see which one's better. It's always together because it's easier. One measures out the ingredients, one preps the oven, one mixes some stuff, another peels or like juices the lemons and whatever we need. I don't think we've ever had an actual competition. No. Like we've played like Smash Brothers and stuff, but very rarely have we ever played against each other, honestly. If you want to have a performance in the middle of a walk cycle, I assume the best way would be to delete a chunk of it and start fresh there. But if you want to have the character keep walking and only animate the upper body, I would assume to do it on a layer. But would you blend it with a normal animation, as in would you maintain the head bob and arm swaying, or would that get in the way of your performance? It really depends on what you're doing. So this is going to be a little tangent here, and then we'll get back to the motion path stuff. So if you're animating a walk cycle and you want the character to maybe, like, let's say the walk cycle is just going like this, and let's go full screen here. character's walking, and then partway through you want them to go, hey, how's it going? And then they go back into the walk cycle. That's going to be breaking the cycle. And the problem is, if we just animate it right on the cycle, what's going to end up happening is later down, maybe 5 seconds down the cycle, they're going to again go, hey! And we don't want that. We just want it to happen once. Typically, the best way to approach that is to use a layer in animation. So you'd add an animation layer and just add that animation over that one section using the controls you need. This way, the walk can still be happening underneath, and you can add that motion over top, either as an override layer, which for anyone who doesn't know, an override layer basically overrides the previous animation underneath, so you can animate something totally fresh, totally new. Or you could do a additive layer, which basically lets you animate over top of it. Now, this is where it would depend on what you're trying to do. If you really want a big, like, hey, how's it going? And everything changes, you probably want an override layer like that. So that way you don't have to try and fight the arm swings and the head bob and all of that. You get to do your own thing and maybe just add a little bit of it in. If it's just kind of like the character's looking or just walking and then they just turn their head and maybe look around and maybe blink and do some acting stuff, then an additive layer is nice because you can just add a rotation to the head and all the head bobs come in and everything stays intact. So there's no true answer to this, unfortunately, because it's really dependent on what you're trying to do. And sometimes you'll mix it together. So you might have one additive layer that is just adding in some head turns and stuff, and an override layer that is totally redoing the one arm so that you can get a full different performance with that. Maybe they're taking a sip of water as they're jogging, and then they go back into the jog. So I hope that answers the question. Unfortunately, there's no one right answer for this. And would you do reviews on stream today too? I'll do this. I'm going to be doing a few reviews, but I'll wait until after the demo, just so I don't get horribly distracted, even though I do get horribly distracted already. Live together, die together, bake together. Exactly. That's an awesome slogan. I love it. Let's see. I wonder if when they did Nemo, they used this, or the software they used didn't have motion paths. For Finding Nemo, I think there was some sort of path tool to it. And then there was also, if I remember correctly, there was a simulation type. It wasn't really path, but some sort of simulation that would just basically move the fish forward. So yeah. So let's get rid of this here and undo the character going forward. Okay. So we've used objects, and hopefully your imaginations are expanding on what you could possibly use motion paths for. They're really cool. I do highly recommend them. They don't replace animation. They just add to what you can do. So let's set up our character to go on a motion path. So the first thing that we're going to do is we need to have a walk cycle in here. But without a walk cycle, we're not going to be getting much of a movement at all. So the way I'm going to do this is I actually animated a walk cycle on a previous stream, and I'm just going to bring this in. I'm using Studio Library, free plugin. If you want to get it, I believe, do I have the link here? Studio Library. No, man, I thought I did. If you just do a Google search for Studio Library Maya, it's there, totally free. It allows you to save animation, poses, all sorts of stuff. So what I want to do is I want to apply this treadmill walk to this character. To do this, I'll just select one control on the character, then right click on the walk and hit select content. What this does is it's going to select every control that it needs to have selected in order to apply the animation properly. This way I know I'm not missing any fingers or IK, FK controls. It'll just apply it all for me. I don't want to apply it to the root controls. That's these controls down here. The root or the layout controls are the main movers of the rig. We're going to be using this later on, so I don't want to apply anything to that. So with that, let's double check our settings. Current time is good. Hit apply. There we go. Let's see. If you animate a walk cycle on a motion path, would you want to animate the weight transfer of the character turning on another animation layer? Well, let me show you the motion here. I think the demo I'm going to show is going to answer that for you. Now, if you're going like a really big weight transfer where the character is running and you want to add a little weight to it, yes, that would definitely be another layer. This way you're not having to ruin the cycle that you're doing. So we've got our animation. Now, it's not going to play correctly because we don't have infinity curves in there. So let's open up our graph editor, take our curves here, and just go to curves, post infinity, and I'm going to do a cycle with offset, so that way the character walks forward. Done. Okay, well, that's pretty easy. So we've got our walk cycle. Now, some of you might have a walk cycle in place, a treadmill walk. That is a character just walking in place and not moving forward. This character is moving forward. This is not a treadmill walk. This is a forward walk. Is that bad? No, but it means we have an extra step before we can use the motion path. In order to properly use the motion path, we want the character to walk on a treadmill, to stay in place instead of moving forward. Now, this is where animation layers can come in very handy. If you have a walk that's already moving forward, you don't have to reanimate it or do a lot of complex math or anything like that. Basically, all we need to do is we need to create a new animation layer. So right here, let's make this a little bit bigger. We've got our animation layer section. You'll see it's empty right now. So let's create a new animation layer. I'll just hit this button here with the plus next to it. Boop. And now we get two layers. This can be very confusing when people first start out. There's always a base animation layer. This one here is what you are always animating on by default. It's just not visible. When we create a new animation layer, in this case anim layer 1, what's happening is it's creating that layer and also making base animation visible. So it is always there. Now, what I want to do here is, let's take anim layer 1. I'm just going to double click on it and I'm going to rename it to reverser. This is going to be my reverse animation layer. It's going to keep the character moving, keep them from moving forward. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm first going to select all the controls I want to stay in place. So this is going to be the hips. I don't want those to move forward. This is also going to affect the whole upper body. I don't want the feet to move forward, so I'll select both of those. And I don't want the knee PVs, the pull vectors, to move forward either. So all of these controls here, you can see that all the controls that are sliding forward as the character walks. Okay. Once I have those selected, I'll right click on the reverser layer, and I'm just going to add selected objects, like so. I'm also going to check my layer mode, make sure that it is set to additive. That's fine. So basically additive means that it's just going to take what I originally had and then add onto it, or in this case, subtract from it. So we've got that. Nothing's working. Well, first we need to actually create the reverse part of it. And this is just going to be copying some curves. So let's start with the hips. We want the hips to stay in place. So I'm going to take the hip control here, go to my base animation layer, and find my translate Z, my forward translation. And I'm just going to take all of this and I'm going to copy it. So it's like all the keys, go to edit, copy. Now I'm going to go to my reverse layer, find my translate Z, set a key on it, and I'm going to go to edit, paste. And there we go. But what we're doing right now is we pasted that curve, that forward momentum, or forward motion I should say, and now we're just doubling it. So if we watch our character here, they're just going to be going way too fast. Their hips are outpacing everything else. So let's take this now, take the entire curve. I'm going to go to edit, scale, and I'm going to scale the value by -1, which essentially means it's going to flip the curve. Scale keys. Now you can see it's going in the opposite direction, which means if we watch the hips, they don't move, because the reverse layer is taking that forward translation and then just basically subtracting it from that forward motion, making it null and void. So let's take this curve now, copy all that, and I'm going to select my PV controls as well as my foot controls. Make sure I'm on my reverse layer here. Set a key. And I'm just going to take my translate Z on all of these. Go to edit, paste. And that's going to paste that reversed curve. And with just that, treadmill. Done. Now, the last thing I do want to make sure is that I cycle it, or else the character, once they break that loop, is going to just start walking forward again. So take all of these, curves, post infinity, cycle with offset, done. Treadmill walk. Easy. This is my personal preference for making treadmill walks all the time. When I'm doing video game animation or when I'm doing animations like this, I hate animating a treadmill walk on a treadmill. I'm just not good at it. I suck at it. Just to be honest, I know people who are amazing at it. It's like it's a no-brainer. They just do it. It's like it's gorgeous. I can't do it for some reason. Every time I try, the feet don't work and it doesn't look good. With this, I can make a treadmill walk without having to deal with trying to wrap my brain and get things to work in a way that I'm just not comfortable with. So let's take a look here. So if we hit play, we've got our treadmill walk done. Yay. So with that, what's the next step? Well, we've got our character walking in place. We've got a reverse layer. Now, the other thing I love about a reverse layer, just a little sidetrack, is you can always turn it off. So just mute the layer. And now you've got your character walking forward again. So now you can always switch back and forth if you want. Yay. And Marissa, thank you so much for the raid. And the host, thank you so much. Aw, I really appreciate that. That's awesome. Hello, everyone. Welcome. And 3D Hours, thank you so much for the follow. Oh man, thank you. So at this point, we've got our walk. We're pretty much ready to have the character start going. So how are we going to do this? Well, essentially all we need to do is take our root control and have it follow a path. So right now, if I take my root control, I can move it around and you'll see that the character walks forward. Very simple. So let's do this. Let's first create a path. And before I do this, I'm going to create a floor just so we can more easily see how the character is walking. This is going to be very important. So I'm going to just create a simple object here. Let's assign a new Lambert to it. And I'm going to assign a checkerboard pattern, maybe not make it pure black. And let's just increase that detail. Ooh, that's dizzying. But the reason I'm putting this in is so that we can see the foot placements. It's going to come in very handy later on. And let's make it a little darker so it's not quite so bright. So something like that. There we go. Okay, so let's create our motion path. I'm going to go to Create, Curves, and I'm going to use the CV Curve tool. I just like the CV Curve tool. You could use an EP Curve or whatever you'd like. So let's start here at the beginning and have the character maybe walk in a straightish line, and let's kind of go make some interesting stuff with this. Let's have the character take a turn and then maybe go around here, and then at the very end, let's do this and have the character, let's see, I'm going to need to think about my layout here. I want the character to go uphill. So let's kind of take the curve here. And at the very end, we'll have the character going up a hill slightly. Maybe not too steep. So something like that. So, I'm also, just for the sake of it, going to take my ground plane here. Let's clean up some of these edges to make it easier. And I'm just going to move that up so we have a slope to go up on. So something like that. We can get the path a little bit more cleaned up in a bit. But as long as we're kind of along the right goal of it, then we're good. So maybe something like that. Okay, so got a lot to do here. So to get this character on the path, we're going to do the exact same thing we did with the cube. We're going to take the control curve, so the root control. Does the path need to be super close to the GP, or is it okay to do it roughly? Path to the GP, do you mean the control? So this main control here? It doesn't need to be, to the ground plane. Okay, yeah. No, it doesn't necessarily have to be on the ground plane. Just keep in mind that if you've animated your character walking on a flat plane and the root control is at neutral, the root control is going to follow this curve. So if the curve follows the ground exactly, the feet should follow pretty much exactly as well. We're always going to have to do a few tweaks, but it'll get us pretty close. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, it just makes it a little easier if it is, or at least close. And are you going to drive the speed of the walk cycle by the speed which the character moves along the path? Yes and no. I'll show you in just a second. So I'm going to take the root control, and now I'm going to select the curve on the ground here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to Constrain, Motion Paths, Attached to Motion Path. Same thing as we did before, and oh, interesting. A novel way of walking, that's for sure. That could work, I guess. What happened? Well, basically what happened is that Maya doesn't know which way the character should be looking. It's just, yeah, art. There you go. That's what happened. It's art. Oh, refined tastes only. $10,000, please. No, what's happening is that Maya just doesn't know which direction that the character should be facing compared to the curve. So this is an easy fix. All we need to do is select the root control, go to the motion path in the channel box right here, and you're going to have your front twist, up twist, side twist. Basically, these control the offsets of the character. So if they're like the wrong axis, they suddenly are on the side. You could use something like a front twist. Up twist is the same, similar. So let's do that. In this case, this is what we want. I just need to set this to 90 degrees. And now, there you go. Characters in line. Done. You could even have them like, yep, just dive into the ground there. So there we go. Now the character's walking, and voila. Zip along. That doesn't look great, does it? They're walking along the curve, but their feet are sliding. It's just speeding up, slowing down randomly. Not great. So at this point, we've got the character following the path. Great. They're going uphill. Great. It even curves them, which we may or may not want. It depends on the thing that we're doing. So for example, if this was a roller coaster, we would definitely want them to go up like this. Since this is a person, we might want to use our side twist here later on to level them out. Let's see. I wonder if that's what's happening on mine. I attached the character and it's not on the curve. Maybe they went underneath the ground plane. Yeah, that could definitely happen. They could have just flipped right underneath 180 degrees. So with this, we've got our character. Now let's focus on one problem at a time. The speed. The speed of the character is not consistent right now. And part of that is because the character is easing in and out. We animated a walk cycle that was linear. It's just a straight walk cycle. There's no speed up, slow down, anything like that. So we kind of need to apply that to our curve here. Right now you can see it's easing out and then easing in. So let's just make that linear. Now it's one constant speed, which is what our walk is. It's constant speed. Still doesn't help much, does it? Character's still sliding around a little bit. So what we need to do now is we need to get the feet to line up with the speed of the walk here. So the character has to match. And this is where things get very tricky, because you have the speed of the character, which you animated. In this case, if I take my translate Z, let's go, let's check this out right here. And I'm actually going to look on my base animation layer. So if we look at our speed, it's approximately, if I was to do some quick math, 5 centimeters per unit. So they're moving about 5 centimeters per, or 5 centimeters per second, approximately, something like that. Yay, a lot of math. And then what's the curve? Well, the curve, there's no specific measurement to it, because it could be short, it could be long. For example, I could take this curve and I'll take this, and now instead of this length, whoop, the curve is this long. That's a lot longer, which means the character is going to have to travel a lot faster to get from one end to the other in the same amount of time. That's a lot of mental gymnastics that we're going to have to start figuring out in order to get this character to follow along at a constant speed for this specific length of curve. I'm not a fan of that. I don't like doing that. I love math. Don't get me wrong. I actually do love math. But as I'm animating, I don't want to have to deal with that kind of stuff. So instead, what I'm going to do is I know that, let's find a contact somewhere in the middle here. Or actually, no, let's start from the beginning. So I know that this foot here is contacting the ground. And on this next frame, it needs to stay exactly there. It can't go backwards. It can't go forwards. It has to stay right there. That heel can't move. So I'm just going to create a locator. Make sure I turn on locators. Where'd my little locator go? There we go. Let's move that into place. And I'm just going to line it up right behind the heel. Right there. So we've got that. Now I'm going to take my motion path here and go to the next frame, and I'm just going to take my curve and let's actually go a few frames ahead. So I know that at this point, you can see how the foot is still flat on the ground. If that foot's still flat on the ground, it hasn't moved yet. So even by frame 7, it shouldn't be going anywhere. So I'm just going to come in here. I'm going to insert a key. And I'm just going to move that back. Set this to linear. Move that back until the heel is exactly where I want it to be. There's my locator. Let's zoom in again. And it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but pretty close is very nice. So now if I go between these two keys, there we go. The foot stays in place for the most part. I've got a little bit of slippage. Looks like my locator was slightly out of place here. Yep, put it right there. Let's readjust. So just move that ever so slightly forward. This is where zooming in is so nice in the graph editor. Okay, there we go. Pretty good. Actually, I think I might have some overlap in my foot. That might be what's causing that little slip. An animation thing, not the motion trail thing. But that's pretty close. If we go at this from a distance, that foot's pretty much in place. Okay. Great. Now what? Well, now all we need to do is take this curve. I don't need this key anymore. I'm going to take the entire curve. This is a lot shorter, which means the character just stops and doesn't move anymore. And I'm going to go to Curves, Post Infinity, Cycle with Offset. And there we go. Get that nice straight curve all the way through. So now the character walks at a nice speed. And we get the character walking along the ground. Done. Now you can see we're going to need a lot more time on this. Probably close to 500 frames. Whoa, not that many frames. So now we've got the character walking all the way through and then uphill. Yay! And ooh, a little too long. So let's actually end our animation just before they get to the actual end there. 320. That looks good. Okay. So there we go. We don't have to get it absolutely perfect because there's always going to be some things that we have to tweak anyway. This just gets us in the ballpark. So we've got that. That looks pretty good actually. For what? If we were to do this quickly, 5 minutes, and we've animated a character walking across this whole place. Done. Not bad. But we have a few things we need to tweak still. First of all, as the character goes uphill, I don't want her to lean backwards. That's not natural. She should be forwards. So this is where you could use an animation layer to course correct the character, or you can animate the motion path itself if you know that you've got a constant angle. So for example here, I know that this angle is pretty constant, so I can just take my, I believe it was a side twist, and let's just bring the character, actually let's make sure I set a key first. Key it there, key it when I want her to be straight right around there. Okay. And then as she goes through, let's just move her forward. And since she's climbing uphill, she would probably have a forward lean to her a little bit as well. Not perfectly straight. So something like this. Let's see how this works just with 2 keys. Yeah, not quite. She needs to go a little bit more forward here. Let's look at our graph editor, make sure I'm not getting a weird curve. Okay. So something like that maybe? Yeah, not bad. You can take some time and really polish this, but there we go. Now we've got the character walking, 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 walking. And when they get to the hill, I should have just scrubbed forward a little bit. And Sunflower, hello! They get to the hill, and they keep going up. Done. Okay. Well, that was easy. Okay, great. We still have one big problem now, which is as the character goes up the hill, those feet do not work at all. They are just broken. And 2, whenever you have a large turn, it's not noticeable in small changes of direction as much. So for example, in this slow turn here, you're not going to see it a ton. But watch the feet. See how they kind of shift side to side? This is what we were seeing at the very beginning. Now let's go into a big turn, like right here. Watch those feet. Look at how much they're slipping and sliding right through all of that. That's not good. That destroys all believability in the walk because now the feet are just doing whatever. So, how do we fix this? This is going to be a pain. We're animating. Well, the problem is we could bake it all, but the problem is there's not really anything to bake per se. Because if we were to bake out the motion trail of the root control, we still have to deal with the root control. We are going to, because we're animating the root control, and this is the negative about this method, there's no way to really easily bake out the root control from the feet and kind of reset the body away from the root control. The root control is what's helping us control everything. The twist of the body, the angle of the head, the arms. If I try to bake this out, for example, to the twist of the body, you can see that that rotation doesn't do the same thing as the root. So baking is not really an option in this case. We could create a counter animation layer. That could definitely work. But the problem with that is that the animation is very complex to try and reverse. In terms of like the reverser layer we had made earlier, we were literally just taking the forward motion and then reversing it, just negative. With this, there's a lot of motion. There's the translate X and Y going in all sorts of directions. We have the pivot point with all of the rotations going around this one central pivot. So it's just a lot of work. Is there a magic button? It's not a magic button, but it's a workaround I like to use. I don't know if it's the best workaround, but I've used it before in the past and it works. It works, I'll say that. And to me, at least, it works very well. So the problem is that we need to set the feet flat on the ground. We need them to just be able to lock in place and not slip and slide all over the place. We also can't affect the root because the root is the thing that's making everything else work. And we could technically try to bake everything out of the root by constraining all sorts of pieces of the body, but then you have the arms, the follow a line. It gets very complex when you start going into all the controls that would have to be reset. Okay. Well, we can do a little bit of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some more locators. So let's create some locators, and I'm going to name them this time because it's always good to name your things, even though I forget very often on stream to do so. Let's take this, and this is going to be our foot location. And let's actually put a capital R just so it's easier to see. Our foot location. And I'm going to duplicate that. And this is going to be L foot location. So left and right foot. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to constrain these to the feet. So I'm going to take this one, constrain it to the left foot here. So select the foot, then the locator, constrain parent, and I'm going to turn maintain offset off. Just hit add. There's the constraint right there. Do it the same with the other foot. Foot, then locator, constrain, done. Okay. You can see they follow along. Great. With that, let's take those controls, both of them, go to edit, keys, bake simulation. I'm going to bake out that constraint, and I'm going to do it on ones just to make sure I don't get any slipping or weirdness. You could do a smart bake or do it on twos. I'm going to do it on ones just to make sure I've got it solid. So bake it out. It's going to take some time. Let it load. We can sit here. Done. So now we have the locators that are going along, but they are no longer attached to their feet. They're doing their own thing. But they are following exactly where the feet are going. How is that helpful to us? That's helpful because now I can reverse things. Now I'm going to take the foot and I'm going to constrain it to the locator. So take the locator, take the foot, constrain parent. Same thing here. Locator, foot, constrain parent. Okay, so what does that do? Visually, nothing has changed. Everything's exactly the same. The difference now is that these locators are not part of the hierarchy of the rig, which means that because the feet are in the hierarchy of the rig, they follow this control no matter what. The locators don't. So by constraining the feet to the locators, now we've got controls on the feet that, even though they look like they're following, I can take this and I can just move it wherever I want. And it's going to work. So with this, I have full control on this animation. Okay, and you can see here's our curves for the feet with all the weirdness and all the rotations. Okay, now what? Well, now all I need to do is make sure that when the foot is flat on the ground, it doesn't move. Well, that's pretty easy. I'm going to find the section where it's about to contact the ground. So right there. And then let's delete the key right after, just so we have a gap. Go forward to the moment when the foot's about to raise off the ground. So right here, we can even see it in the curves very easily. Delete all the keys in the middle. And then, let's see, for some reason my graph or my timeline isn't showing my curves here. Weird. What happened to you, timeline? Display keys. Okay. Well, I'm not going to be able to do it here. I'll have to do it in the graph editor. So I'll go to the frame where the foot's about to leave the ground, and I'm just going to middle mouse drag back to frame 1. Set a key. So what that does is it copies the pose from the first frame, and wait, there you go. Now it's working. What's going on here? Oh, I know. I accidentally baked it onto a separate layer. So this is something to be very careful of. Let's undo a little bit. So this was some another project I was working on. I had changed some settings. This is why it's always important to double check your settings when you're about to do something. Same goes with constraints, whatever. So here we have the locators constrained back to the feet. And when I baked them out, what happened was, if we go to edit, keys, bake simulation, there's this option right here, new layer, bake to new layer. Because that happened, I was still trying to work on the base animation layer, and I was getting this, basically I was fighting Maya. Make sure to go to edit, reset settings. It makes your life a whole lot easier. So let's do that, and now let's bake. Actually, I hope I selected both of them. I did. Perfect. So now things should work. I was wondering why the timeline wasn't working correctly. So let's double check our animation layers. There we go. Ah, there's our keys. So now let's go back to our steps. We need to constrain the foot to the locator now. So constrain parent. And then same thing here. Constrain parent. And now, that's much better. It's a nightmare mess, but it's going to be easier to work with. So once again, take all the keys in the middle, delete them, then middle mouse drag from the last key to the first one and set a key. This flattens that curve, and now that foot stays perfectly in place. It doesn't move. Whereas you look at, let's say, the next step here. So this step here, see how the foot's sliding around? Well, let's do the same thing. So let's take our curves here, find the contact. That's going to be right here. Delete. find the last key, which we can see this is where the foot lifts. So I'm just going to delete this and everything in the middle. And I personally prefer taking the last key here and duplicating it backwards, or copying it backwards. The reason being, when we're about to walk, our feet will point in the direction that we're about to turn. So if I'm going to turn this way, my feet aren't going to point this way and then I turn and I twist and break my ankle. I'm going to turn and my foot placement is going to turn with me. So this means that if I take that placement of the foot over here, that's that foot already turned, ready to go. So if I copy it backwards here, that foot is anticipating the turn and getting that nice extra little motion in there. So it kind of creates the feeling that the character is actually walking along the path instead of their feet just doing random stuff. So once again, let's take a look at this. Contact, perfectly still compared to that step right there. So at this point, you just go through, and this is a little tedious. Going to view and then normalize view can make this a little easier because now you're not having to look at the curves going up and down, up and down. So just take all of this, boop, delete, copy, there. Now we will have to do some curve cleanup because we're going to have some snaps, but that's not so bad compared to the alternative. So we do that. It's kind of, this is one of those moments where I would just put on like a YouTube video or some good music and just kind of zone out. So something like that. Always good to double check. Make sure you're not getting weirdness. So you can see here how the ankle snaps right there. This is easy to fix. I'm not going to worry about it now, but it's just something that to keep in mind. The feet are going to have some little pops and twists in them. So do that. I shouldn't have made this so long. Why did I pick such a long course? Okay. But I guess it is good to show the workflow. So once you can recognize the pattern in the curves, it really isn't so bad. So there, copy, and then we can keep going here as well. Now this is going to be when the feet go up, so we're going to have to take some special consideration for that, but at least for now we can get the majority of it in place. There we go. And then even here. There we go. So now, if we just look at this one foot throughout the whole shot, let's actually start at the beginning here. So that's the red foot here. As they walk, that foot hits the ground and doesn't move. Now there's going to be areas with this rig, the legs don't stretch. So for example, you'll notice here, the foot kind of goes down and then raises back up. This is because the leg is actually stretching too far. So we might have to reposition some stuff. This is where an animation layer will come in handy, because now that foot is technically still. If we look at the curve on the ground, not the foot, that hits and then it stays there. So once we do this, it's just a matter of creating another animation layer over top and refining some stuff. Maybe lowering the hips for this one step, maybe adjusting the foot a little bit further off of the curve. So instead of landing here, maybe the foot's going to land over here. Little things like that. It's going to take time. There is a lot of cleanup to this. This is not a miracle cure where it's like, oh yeah, just ding, done, haha, where we never have to worry about anything ever again. No, you will have to watch out what you're doing. But compared to the alternative, which could be absolutely nightmarish in terms of polishing, I would much rather do this. So once again, let's actually clean this foot up. I'm just going to take the time to do that. set a key. And you can see once you know the pattern, it really doesn't take that long. Okay. So, shoot. Key. Key. And I'm just middle mouse dragging for anyone who's curious. What about body tilting inward centripedically along the curve? So that's what you would use another animation layer for. In this case, there's not going to be any of that because the character is walking so slow. I don't have to worry about it. If you have a run cycle, that's definitely something you're going to have to think about, and something that an animation layer is basically going to help you solve very easily. You would just need to add an animation layer to the cog of the character, the center of gravity, and just kind of rotate it. You could use an additive layer for that. Now, again, I say just. In animation, when we say, oh, it's simple, or just do this, it means that there's like 10 other steps that you also have to do to make it look good. But compared to the 100 steps that you'd have to do otherwise, it's not so bad. So let's come in here. Now we're starting to get into some weirdness because the foot's going uphill. So let me try to visualize what's going on here. Yeah, it's starting to float upwards. And that's because the control is, okay, it's right here, at an angle. Okay, so up to this point. So delete that. Copy that. Now you'll notice that we start getting a lot of weirdness here, where the feet are going to be offset in very strange ways. That's fine. When you're dealing with uphill climbs, there's even more work that has to be done compared to just walking on a flat terrain. It's just kind of part of the process. Okay. So we have this. Those feet. Actually, did I miss some keys on this one? I might have. Oh no, it's just the curve. Yeah, so I'll have to go through a quick curve pass on that. But let's kind of focus on the ground first, because that's what most people will tend to use this for. Okay, so we've got this, and now let's look at the feet. And let's kind of focus in a little closer here. And you can see that there's definitely some issues. The feet are not perfect. There's some pops and wiggles. But these are coming just from slight tweaks that have to be done, where the hips might need to be lowered, the foot position might just be adjusted slightly. Everything else is in place. Pretty quick, honestly. All things considered, I've got a walk cycle. What we've been doing this for 30 minutes or so with explanation. When you get used to this workflow, this could have been like 10-15 minutes, and we've already got a character walking for 200 frames on a complex path. Done. Trying to animate a walk cycle just for 200 frames alone is horrible. Nightmarish. And this stream is recorded. All the streams are recorded, and they should be posted in the VOD section, or the videos section. Actually, if you click on the avatar, which should be in the bottom left corner there of the video, you can get to all the pre-recorded videos. I definitely do need to make some YouTube videos at some point when I get some time. That's going to be my next thing. That's going to be the thing I put on my tombstone. When I have time. Okay. And Peter, hello. So let's start cleaning things up. I'm just going to do this a little bit because at this point it's just kind of doing a lot of extra work, which And honestly, I'm just doing this as a demonstration. We're not going to be polishing this up to a final thing. But let's kind of pick a few steps that we can work on. Yeah, he's not even sleeping. Not exactly. That would be perfect. So let's try to fix this footstep here. You can see how that leg is way too far. It's kind of got this really big step. And it's just not great. So we've got a few choices we can do. We can either adjust the hips, or we could just adjust the position of the foot. So in this case, if they're taking a step around a corner, it feels odd that the foot would be so far out. So let's just take our translate X and see if we can just quickly adjust this without having to add another layer. I'm just going to bring that foot in, like maybe right around there. So now as they're taking this corner, they're just not taking such a wide step. Now, you can see the body would also need to be adjusted slightly. This is where, I'm definitely going to just do an animation layer. So I'm going to take the locators for the feet, take the hip control, and let's just add a new layer here. And then we'll call this walk adjust. And basically what I need to do with this is just set some keys. So we'll start on this step here. I'm going to set a key on this, and it'll start right where they are now. And then as we go forward, this is going to be an additive layer. So let me actually double check this right click. Yeah, additive. So as that foot comes down to the ground here, I want that foot to be positioned maybe just a little bit further this way. Okay. So it comes in, contacts the ground there. Now the hips should probably also make sure, okay, I'm on that layer. Hips will be adjusted this way, keep the character in balance. There we go. So already just by doing those two keys, we're starting to fix that step. Now there's still some weirdness going on, specifically in the rotate Y of this foot. That's going to be on my base animation layer. So I'll just double check my rotate Y. Yeah. You can see how it's just cranking over there. So I'm just going to delete some keys and whoop, do that. Now that foot comes through, and there we go. And I can just do a very quick cleanup here. I would actually, personally, I would like to do the clean, or I can speak. I like to do the cleanup before I get to the animation layer, because then I don't have to worry about so much randomness happening. But that really comes down to personal preference. Usually it's going to be the rotate Y, as well as either the translate Z or X. Let's actually... let's take that foot position, go to our walk adjust. I'm going to set a key here. And then as it gets to this point, I'm just going to move it in a little bit. A little bit like that. There we go. Now that rotate Y feels a little too much, so I could adjust that, but with just that, there we go. Steps cleaned up. Now, this is where it's just a process of going through, making sure that your weight shifts are working, all of that stuff. Like right here, that leg is starting to collapse in on itself. So I would want to make sure that as it comes through, we just pull that over across there. Okay. Then just tweak that pose there. The joy of legs. They all start getting weird. I think I know what's going on. Just moved it a little too far. Be more out there. Okay. Go. Yeah. And then just need to start adding some twists and whatnot. So I can take my heel control here and just start twisting that, or adding extra controls. At this point, it's really just cleanup, which honestly I don't want to do, because if I was going to do this, I would just try to animate something a little bit more interesting to begin with. But one thing I did want to show is as the character walks up, because this is going to be the area that's going to be very important that we get right, and could be a pain. Humans turn corners very strangely, honestly. So really what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go to my base animation layer and make sure that the feet are contacting the ground here. So let's look at my translate Y. So oops, make sure I'm actually on the right control here. Oop, there we go. Translate Y. And we can see right there, this is the issue. That foot is just kind of going way too high. So let's lower it to the point where, in this case, I just need kind of the foot flat on the ground there. Now you'll see the foot raises up. This is because the hips are going too high. I would need to add a hip adjustment layer here, just to bring the hips up. Bring the hips down as the character walks up the hill. So let's quickly and roughly do this. So make sure that foot is in place. Make sure I'm clicking the right control again. So that foot is going to have to be down here approximately. Okay. Let's get all of the foot positions in place here. Right there. So now you can see as the character walks up, foot contacts, and they start floating up. Not good. Okay. Let's quickly go to the hip adjustment. So that animation layer there. Take my translate Y of the hips, and I'm just going to lower it so that the feet never come off the ground too high. So something like that. This character going uphill, these are very wide strides for a character going uphill, by the way. Let's bring this lower a little bit here. Maybe lower that as well. No, needs to be a little lower. I think that, no, actually that foot's good. Okay. I need to adjust the translate Y of this one. Now this is where you want to be very careful. You're going to be dealing with a lot of layers, and it can be very tricky to start looking at everything and trying to keep track of it all. Just be very careful of that. You don't want to get to the point where you're just animating on the wrong layers all the time. And right at the end, let's go back in here, take our translate Y, bring that down. So I think that's a good level right there. Maybe a little lower. Okay. So now, you'll notice the feet are not right yet, but now as she goes up, we get that. The feet are not breaking. So we get that. We can also maybe have the character start to lean forward a little bit here in the hips, just a little bit. Like that. Okay. At this point, just some foot polish, which again, I'm not going to try to do a ton of. So you would go through, and the first things first before getting the toes to not cut into the ground is just fixing a lot of the spacing issues. So let's take this, and you can see how that foot just snaps up, just right there. Let's bring that down so the foot comes up and arcs a little bit more. Now the big thing with this is the mechanics of a walk uphill are very different than the mechanics of a walk on flat ground. So we're going to basically be kind of reanimating a whole chunk of it. Ideally, what you would have for this is a different cycle, an uphill cycle. It's not necessary, but it definitely makes it a lot easier. Okay, that's a little too high. So, even just doing this, now we get that nice step right in there. Maybe take our... Yeah, that's good. Next step, same thing. So, hopefully this is making sense. I know I'm not polishing things up, but I'm being lazy today. I ended up having classes since 10 o'clock last night. It's almost 2 o'clock now. So I'm giving myself this excuse. I can be lazy today. It's me time. So let's actually bring this up here. Clean that up. Okay. They're supposed to last 2 hours. Yeah. And the critiques are supposed to be 10 minutes. Oops. It all went wrong. It was like 5 minutes in. It's like, nope. Apparently I'm terrible at this. So yeah. It was an interesting. Did you ever listen to Dofus theme music? I'm sure you would love it. Well, this is my background. So I think you could probably guess the answer. I love Dofus. It is one of my favorite animations. That and the whole Wakfu series, the Dofus Livre de Caribim series, as well as the Trésor de Caribim and Livre de Lilith. I believe they are. So yes, I love that. I actually don't have the soundtrack. Now that you mention it, I need to go find it and download it. Buy it and download it. My brain would break trying to animate this full 8 hours sleep. Once you get used to it, it's not so bad. Like right now, I'm skipping ahead and doing a lot of like stuff, I'll admit, kind of lazily, which means that I'm doing more work than I need to, but it is really just I don't feel like going through all the steps right now. this just a little bit more. Okay. But you can see even just doing this, we're starting to get a cycle. It's awful. But a big part of it is that the feet just need to be a little bit of, just have a little retiming. And then kind of refocus on a few other areas. So for example, here, that foot needs to be much lower. It wouldn't go up so high. Even here, those feet are picking up way too fast. Should probably be more like this. Around there. And this is where you also want to just start deleting keys. There's no point in keeping all of these keys. It'll just mess up your, mess things up for you. So don't worry about cleaning your curves up. And now we get that. Much cleaner. And keep in mind, this is also just the translate Y, not the forward translation or anything else. There we go. Starting to get that motion there. That step's too high still. That is very high step for walking uphill. Okay. So there we go. At this point, the big thing I would need to do is focus on the rotation of the ankles. And then basic curve cleanup. That's pretty much it. I did play both the games, both Dofus and Wakfu. I never really got into Wakfu as much, unfortunately. I always loved the art style. I just didn't have the time. But yeah, so for the most part, the feet definitely need like a whole pass on them, but you can see how this is going to start making our lives a whole lot easier. And we can, at this point, just go through and add some cleanup to it. And this is usually done with animation layers. This way we can preserve that cycle underneath. Now, with that said, sometimes you will want to bake out the animation afterwards. So once you have the cycle in here, I could take my whole base animation layer, just like all my controls there, and just bake all of this out. So let's not take our constrained feet here. So where's that other control? I'll take that. Okay. What else do I have selected here? Okay, yeah, it's the feet. So you'll see that most of the walk, all of the controls are really just 29 frames. They're not that much. I could even take these 2 foot controls here. Actually, that's 29 frames. 9. Okay, perfect. So let's take the character here. Make sure I don't select any of the curves of the feet. Oh, I know why. It's because I've got my other animation layers visible. Let's lock those. The joy of trying to select specific things. Okay. Take that root control there, and then all of this. Okay, let's look at our base animation layer, and you'll notice that the base animation layer, we still only have Everything keyed on 29 frames. Everything else is just animation layers and constraints. So our cycle is technically still 29 frames if we needed to make a big change to the whole cycle. But what if we wanted to take all this now and create just this core animation that we don't have to deal with all of these layers? We just have this in place. There's a few different ways we could do that. Let me think of the best way here. Could bake everything. So bake simulation on here. Bake everything out. Yeah, so what we would do is we would bake everything out and then just delete our layer structure. So collapse it all onto one new animation. I'm not going to do this here because I've tried that before on stream and it crashes. But you'd bake all this out, all your infinity curves, collapse your animation layers onto one new curve, and now you'll have a core piece of animation that is totally editable on each frame. You don't have to try and jump between layers and all of that. So, yeah, this is pretty much it. I know, like, animation-wise, this doesn't look great because, well, we haven't polished it at all. But hopefully you can kind of see the merit of this. I try not to use this for things that are too big. For example, walking uphill. I'm not a fan of it because it's just a lot of work to try and fix something and hopefully it comes out okay versus trying to animate that very specific thing myself. Now, if I knew that they were going to be climbing uphill for maybe, like, I don't know, 500 frames, it's just this uphill climb, what I would do is I would first make a quick 30 frame cycle of the character walking uphill and then use that on a path going uphill. I would not take a walk cycle like this and have it go up a steep hill. A little bit of an incline, sure. A big steep hill? No. Walking through difficult terrain? No. So for example, let's say they're walking through swampy terrain that's just like catching on their legs and everything. This very difficult terrain or rocky and like uneven. I would animate again a cycle of them walking through that hard terrain where they really have to push through or where they have to keep their balance, versus trying to take an existing animation cycle and try to get that to work. Or I would take my existing one and first just reanimate that cycle, that first 30 frames, before doing the motion path. This way I don't have to fight. Like right here, you could see I have to fight from 250 all the way to 320. That's 70 frames that I'm going to have to fight to get right. Versus if I made sure that that first 30 frame cycle was good for the uphill climb, and then I just used that. That's going to be much better, much easier to polish, and then I can just add little tweaks to add variation. So this is a very powerful tool, but don't feel like it is a catch-all. Well, now that I know it, I just have to hit a button. Aha, it follows a path. Done! No. Done in many ways. In other ways, just the start. And you want to expand and do multiple different things instead of just kind of trying to let it apply to everything. Hopefully that makes sense.